I never thought my perfect night would end with me hiding in my own bathroom, desperately searching through my fiancé's phone. But there I was, hands shaking as I scrolled through Nate's messages, my engagement ring catching the dim light while my stomach twisted into knots. My name is Harper, and 2 hours ago, I was on top of the world. Nate had just proposed to me in front of 300 guests at his annual charity gala. The ring was stunning, the champagne was flowing, and everyone kept telling me how lucky I was to have caught New York's most eligible real estate mogul. Then I overheard him in the hallway. "The prenup is already drafted," he was saying to someone. "She'll sign it. Harper's not the type to make waves." I'd frozen mid-step, my champagne glass nearly slipping from my fingers. We hadn't discussed a prenup. We hadn't discussed anything about our future finances, really. But it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like he was discussing a business transaction. That's when I noticed his phone on the bathroom counter. He must have left it there while fixing his tie earlier. I knew the passcode, his daughter's birthday from his first marriage. The same marriage he claimed ended because his ex-wife was unstable and greedy. My hands trembled as I opened his messages. Most were business-related, nothing suspicious. Until I saw a conversation with someone saved as VR. Everything's proceeding as planned. H took the bait perfectly. Time to initiate phase 2. The timestamp was from just before the proposal. My chest tightened as I scrolled through more cryptic messages about assets and securing the position. None of it made sense, but it felt wrong. All of it felt wrong. A knock at the door made me jump. "Harper? Sweetheart, are you okay in there?" Nate's voice was honey-smooth, concerned. The same voice that had promised me forever just hours ago. "Just fixing my makeup." I called back, quickly closing his messages and placing the phone exactly where I'd found it. "Well, hurry back. Ron wants to toast us again." I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was flushed, but my eyes were clear. Something wasn't right about this night, about this proposal, about Nate. And as I straightened my dress and prepared to return to my own engagement party, I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what phase 2 meant, even if it destroyed everything I thought I knew about the man I'd just agreed to marry. The morning after my engagement, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work. Instead of heading to my trading desk, I sat in my favorite coffee shop, laptop open, diving deep into everything I could find about Nate's real estate empire. 3 hours and 4 espressos later, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from the caffeine, but from what I'd discovered. Earth to Harper. Laura dropped into the seat across from me, making me jump. I hadn't even noticed my best friend arrive. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. Why aren't you at work?" I turned my laptop toward her. "Look at this. Nate's biggest development project, the Marina Heights? The one he says is almost sold out. According to public records, only 30% of the units are actually sold." Laura leaned forward, her therapist face on. "And that means? It means he lied to his investors. To me." I lowered my voice. "He used those fake sales numbers to secure another loan last month. A big one. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation," Laura suggested, but her expression said she didn't believe it either. My phone buzzed. Nate's face lit up my screen. "Speaking of reasonable explanations," I muttered, declining the call. "You can't avoid him forever," Laura said. "You're supposed to be planning a wedding." The word wedding made my stomach lurch. "I need to see something first." I pulled up another tab. Remember that mysterious VR? From his messages? I think I found. "Harper." I slammed my laptop shut as Nate's voice boomed across the coffee shop. He strode toward us, all perfect suit and winning smile, but something was off in his eyes. "I've been calling you all morning," he said, kissing my cheek. His hand lingered possessively on my shoulder. "Why aren't you at work?" "Not feeling well," I managed, acutely aware of my laptop under my hands. "Laura was just checking on me." "That's what I love about you," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "Always thinking of others. Speaking of which, I need you to come to dinner tonight. Some investors want to meet my beautiful fiancé. Tonight? I don't know if I'm up for." "Please." His grip tightened slightly. "It's important. And afterward, we can discuss that prenup I mentioned. Just a formality, really." I forced a smile, ignoring Laura's concerned look. "Of course. What time?" 7. "I'll send a car." He checked his watch. "I have to run. Feel better, sweetheart." Another quick kiss and he was gone. Laura waited until the door closed behind him. "Harper, what aren't you telling me about last night?" I opened my laptop again, hands steady now. "Everything. And I need your help figuring out who Vanessa Reed is before I sit down to dinner tonight." The investor dinner turned out to be a trap. Not the kind with armed thugs or dramatic confrontations, but something far more insidious. I sat at the head of a long table in Nate's penthouse, watching my life savings disappear with each passing minute. "Just think of it as an investment in our future," Nate said, sliding the transfer paperwork across the table. His investors, 3 men in expensive suits, watched me with predatory eyes. The Marina Heights project needs a cash injection, and who better to trust than family? My hand trembled as I held the pen. $2 million. My entire portfolio, built over a decade of careful trading. I thought the project was almost sold out. "It is," Nate replied smoothly, but his jaw tightened. "This is just temporary. A bridge until the next round of funding closes." Ron Carter, Nate's lawyer, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Our eyes met briefly, and something in his expression made my stomach drop. "Could I review this with my financial advisor first?" I asked. One of the investors, a silver-haired man named Marcus, chuckled. "The opportunity closes tonight. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts, my dear." "Harper." Nate's voice was gentle, but his eyes were hard. "Remember what we discussed about the prenup? This shows good faith. That we're in this together." Whirled in my head as I stared at the transfer form. Laura's words from earlier echoed in my mind. "Don't sign anything until you know the whole story." I picked up the pen. "I need to use the bathroom first," I said, standing up. "Excuse me." In the hallway bathroom, I splashed water on my face and pulled out my phone. A new email had just arrived, from an anonymous account. The subject line made my blood freeze. "Vanessa Reed, the truth about Nate Chambers." A knock at the door made me jump. "Miss Winslow?" It was Ron. A moment. I opened the door cautiously. Ron glanced down the hallway before speaking in a low voice. "Don't sign those papers," he whispered. "Something's not right with the numbers. I've been looking into." "Harper." Nate's voice boomed from the dining room. "Everything okay?" Ron stepped back quickly, his face neutral again. But he'd said enough. I walked back to the table, picked up the pen, and smiled at Nate. "I'm sorry, but I can't sign this tonight. I need time to think." The silence that followed was deafening. Nate's mask slipped for just a second, but it was enough. I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. "Of course," he said finally, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We have all the time in the world." But as I left the penthouse that night, I knew time was the one thing I didn't have. 9 months passed in a blur of morning sickness, prenatal appointments, and Nate's increasingly frequent business trips. When Ellie finally arrived, screaming her way into the world at 3:47 a.m., I was alone in the delivery room. Nate was in Singapore closing another deal. "She's perfect," Laura whispered, holding my daughter while I recovered. "And she looks just like you." I couldn't stop staring at Ellie's tiny face, memorizing every detail. "I need to tell you something," I said quietly. "Remember that email about Vanessa Reed?" Before I could continue, my hospital room door swung open. Nate strode in, still in his travel suit, carrying an enormous bouquet. "There's my girls." Laura's grip on Ellie tightened slightly before she handed her over to Nate. I watched him hold our daughter, searching his face for any sign of genuine emotion. Instead, he was checking his phone with his free hand. "We need to discuss the trust fund," he said, not looking up from his screen. "I've had Ron draw up the paperwork. Just need your signature to move forward. I just gave birth, Nate. Which is exactly why we need to secure Ellie's future." He finally looked at me, his expression softening. "Trust me, Harper. I know what's best for our family." Laura cleared her throat. "I should go. Harper needs rest." After she left, Nate placed Ellie in her bassinet and sat on my bed. "About that investment we discussed. I need an answer soon. The window's closing. I thought you said the Singapore deal would cover everything?" His jaw tightened. Complications arose. "Nothing I can't handle, but..." A knock interrupted us. Ron stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "Sorry to interrupt, but Marcus is on the line." "It's urgent." Nate's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear flash across his face. "I have to take this," he said, already heading for the door. "We'll talk later." After he left, I noticed he'd dropped a piece of paper. It was a bank statement, not for his business accounts, but for a private offshore account I'd never seen before. The balance made my blood run cold. $50 million, transferred out just yesterday. My phone lit up with a text from Laura. "Check your email. Now." There it was. The full email about Vanessa Reed, forwarded from an anonymous account. The first line made everything click into place. Vanessa Reed didn't disappear with Nate's money 5 years ago. He helped her fake her death to avoid federal investigators. I looked at Ellie, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, then back at the bank statement in my trembling hands. I had to protect her, even if it meant destroying the man I thought I loved. I followed Nate's town car through the rainy Manhattan streets, keeping 3 cars between us. 5 months of sleepless nights with Ellie had taught me patience. 5 months of watching Nate's increasingly erratic behavior had taught me caution. The car stopped outside a warehouse in Brooklyn. Not exactly the typical venue for the business dinner he'd told me about. I parked across the street, watching as Nate hurried inside, collar turned up against the rain. My phone buzzed. "Laura, are you sure about this?" I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled up the photos I'd taken of Nate's recent bank transfers. $5 million here, $10 million there, all moving through a maze of offshore accounts. The same pattern Vanessa Reed had uncovered before her disappearance. Movement caught my eye. A woman in a red coat entered the warehouse. Something about her walk, her posture. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in on her face. My hands started shaking. It was her, Vanessa Reed, very much alive. I was out of the car before I could think better of it. The warehouse door was unlocked. Inside, voices echoed from above. "The feds are closing in," Vanessa was saying. "We need to move everything now." "It's not ready," Nate replied. "Harper's still holding out on the investment. Your wife is smarter than you think. I've been watching her. She's digging. She won't find anything. And soon it won't matter. Once she signs over her portfolio." A floorboard creaked under my foot. The voices stopped. I backed away, but it was too late. Footsteps approached the stairs. I turned to run and crashed straight into Ron. "Harper." His face went pale. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I said, noting the guilty flash in his eyes. "How long have you known?" Before he could answer, Nate appeared at the top of the stairs. "Harper, what a surprise." He smiled, but it was the smile I'd seen the night he proposed, calculated, cold. Vanessa emerged behind him, studying me with curious eyes. "I suppose we should talk," Nate said, descending the stairs. "About everything." I backed toward the door. "I think I've seen enough." "Have you?" He reached into his jacket. "Because I have something you should see too. Photos of Ellie at daycare. Your mother's house in Connecticut. Laura's office. It would be a shame if anything happened." I didn't let him finish. I ran. Behind me, I heard him call out, almost lazily. "You have 24 hours to transfer the money, Harper. For our daughter's sake, don't disappoint me." The rain had turned to ice, but I barely felt it. I finally knew what I had to do. And Nate had no idea what was coming. The FBI agent across the table pushed a stack of photos toward me. Each one showed Nate with different investors, all now under federal investigation. My hands trembled as I recognized faces from that dinner where he'd tried to take my savings. "Mrs. Chambers, we need your cooperation," Agent Torres said. "Your husband's financial empire isn't just unstable, it's criminal." I glanced at the clock. 16 hours left before Nate's deadline. Ellie was safe with Laura, but for how long? "If I help you," I said, "what guarantees do I have that my daughter will be protected?" Before Torres could answer, Ron burst into the interview room. "Don't say another word, Harper." He turned to the agent. "This interview is over." Outside, in the federal building's parking garage, Ron grabbed my arm. "Are you trying to get yourself killed? Nate has people everywhere. Like you." I pulled away. "Whose side are you really on, Ron?" He looked around nervously before pulling out his phone. "Listen to this." A recording played, Nate and Vanessa discussing their next move. My blood ran cold when I heard them mention Ellie. "The trust fund's perfect," Nate was saying. "Once Harper signs it over, we transfer everything offshore. If she causes problems afterward, well, single mothers have accidents all the time." Ron stopped the recording. "He's planning to run tomorrow night. With everything, including Ellie's trust fund." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Warehouse. Now, come alone or the photos go public." "It's a trap," Ron said. "I don't have a choice." I showed him my screen. Someone had sent pictures of Laura's office, with red X's marked over the windows. "There's always a choice," Ron said, reaching into his briefcase. "Which is why I brought these." He handed me a USB drive and a manila envelope. "Everything you need to destroy him. Bank records, offshore accounts, proof of his connection to Vanessa's fake death. But using them means burning everything down, including your marriage." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Laura. "Someone's watching the house." I thought of Ellie's smile this morning, how she'd waved goodbye without knowing her whole world was about to shatter. I thought of Nate's face the night he proposed, wondering if any of it had been real. "Sometimes," I said, taking the envelope, "you have to burn it all down to build something better." I headed for my car, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. Nate thought he was setting a trap, but he'd forgotten one thing. A mother protecting her child is more dangerous than any financial predator. The warehouse waited in the darkness. It was time to end this, one way or another. The warehouse was darker than before, but I wasn't alone. Vanessa stepped out of the shadows, her red coat like a splash of blood in the darkness. "He's not here yet," she said, lighting a cigarette. "But you brought it?" I held up the USB drive. "Everything the FBI needs to know about both of you." She laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was tired. "You think I'm still working with him?" "Honey, I've been dead for 5 years because of Nate Chambers. I want him buried more than you do." Footsteps echoed behind me. Nate emerged, looking immaculate as always, but his eyes were wild. "Ladies, having a nice chat." "It's over, Nate," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The FBI has everything." "No, they don't." He pulled out his phone, showing me a live feed of Laura's house. "But they will, unless you transfer Ellie's trust fund right now." "That money's already gone," Vanessa cut in. "I moved it this morning, along with everything else." Nate's composure cracked. "You're bluffing." "Check your accounts," I said, pulling out my own phone. "While you were watching Laura's house, you forgot about your other weakness, Ron. He's been helping me for months." Nate's fingers flew over his phone screen. I watched the color drain from his face. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "Those investors will kill me if they don't get their money." "Like you killed me?" Vanessa stepped forward. "Or we're going to kill Harper?" "I never." He reached into his jacket. "Federal agents. Hands where we can see them." The warehouse exploded with light and movement. Agent Torres led a team through every entrance. Ron appeared behind them, holding up his phone. He'd been recording everything. Nate looked at me one last time. Not with anger, but with something worse, recognition. He finally saw me clearly, and he knew he'd underestimated me completely. "You could have just signed the prenup," he said as agents cuffed him. "And you could have just been a better father to Ellie." I turned to leave, then stopped. "By the way, Vanessa didn't move your money. But while you were distracted by her, I did. It's in a trust for Ellie that you'll never touch." Outside, Laura was waiting in her car with Ellie asleep in the back seat. Agent Torres approached with papers for me to sign. "Mrs. Chambers," she began. "It's Miss Winslow," I corrected her, watching Nate being led to a police car. "And I'd like to go home now. My daughter and I have a new life to begin." The night air was cold, but for the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's becoming stronger than they ever thought you could be. 6 months after Nate's arrest, I stood in the doorway of our new beach house, watching Ellie chase seagulls across the sand. Laura sat beside me on the porch, both of us sipping coffee and enjoying the morning quiet. "Ron called," she said. "The sentencing is tomorrow." I nodded, remembering the last time I'd seen Nate. In court, his expensive suit replaced by prison orange, still trying to charm the judge. The evidence Ron had helped me gather had been overwhelming. Nate's empire of lies had crumbled in less than a week. "Are you going?" Laura asked. "No." I watched Ellie draw pictures in the sand with a stick. "That chapter's closed." My phone buzzed, a text from Vanessa. "Thank you. For everything." She'd used her testimony to avoid prosecution, then disappeared again. This time I suspected for good. "Miss Winslow." A delivery man approached with a thick envelope. The return address made my heart skip. Nate's prison. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a deed to Marina Heights, signed over to Ellie's trust. No note, no explanation. Just his signature and a single word. "Sorry." "Well, that's unexpected," Laura said, reading over my shoulder. "Is it?" I thought about Ron's revelation last week, about how he'd spent years watching Nate destroy lives, waiting for someone strong enough to stand up to him. How he'd seen that strength in me the moment Nate proposed. "Mommy, look," Ellie called, pointing at something in the sand. I walked down to join her, leaving Nate's letter behind. She'd drawn a family portrait. Her and me, holding hands beside our new house. No space left empty for the father she barely remembered. "It's beautiful, sweetie," I said, hugging her close. "Why don't we frame it? Can we put it next to the engagement picture?" I froze. That photo still sat on her dresser. The last reminder of the life I'd thought we'd have. I'd kept it, telling myself Ellie deserved to see her parents happy, even if it was just pretend. Actually, I said, I think it's time for a new picture. Just us. Ellie smiled, already drawing another masterpiece in the sand. The tide was coming in, and soon her pictures would wash away. But that was okay. Sometimes the most beautiful things are temporary, and the strongest foundations are built on what remains after the waves recede. I looked at our beach house, smaller than Nate's penthouse, but paid for with honest money and filled with real love. The revenge I'd sought had transformed into something better: freedom. Not just from Nate, but from the fear of trusting my own strength. The morning sun caught my bare ring finger. I hadn't worn a ring since that night in the warehouse. Some fingers are better left empty, marking not what we've lost, but what we've chosen to let go.